afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to Global Atheist News Roundup, dateline 22nd of June 2024. This week's headlines. The Hezbollah campaign against Israel could trigger a devastating all-out Middle East war. Hundreds die in intense heat during the Hajj pilgrimage in Saudi Arabia. A Birmingham general election candidate joked about domestic violence. A Christian university faces a class action lawsuit for lying about their tuition costs. A new law requires all Louisiana public school classrooms to display the Ten Commandments. A judge rejects the effort by Missouri clergy to fight the abortion ban. A Bling bishop, US pastor, was sentenced to 9 years. And in Toronto, a mobile display van makes a point. Here is the news in detail. Hezbollah, a more powerful Islamist group than Hamas, and Israel could accidentally trigger a wider regional conflict, despite ongoing attempts to avoid exacerbating tensions in the Middle East, a former Israeli intelligence operative warned. The two sides have been engaging in low-intensity fighting since October, when the Lebanon-based militant group declared its support for Hamas and said it would target Israeli forces engaged in bombing the Gaza Strip. Hezbollah has repeatedly targeted Israel's territory with missile strikes, which have been met with a consistent response from Tel Aviv, but have not escalated further. However, former officer Avi Melamed told the Daily Express that there remains a considerable risk that the growing crossfire could accidentally result in a much bigger direct confrontation. Mr. Melamed said, despite ever-growing international fears that Israel and Hezbollah are on the cusp of an all-out war along Israel's northern borders, both sides have kept to their guidelines in the ever-escalating exchange of crossfire. It seems that Hezbollah is aware that an attack on Haifa, or an attack that claims significant Israeli civilian casualties, will likely trigger a full-scale Israeli response, and it's thus targeted its strikes on military targets, as well as evacuated communities along Israel's northern border. Likewise, Israel has shown restraint in its targeting specific Hezbollah commanders and infrastructure, with the understanding that every attack on Hezbollah's higher echelon will trigger a larger-scale Hezbollah response. However, Mr. Melamed warned, despite both Israel and Hezbollah's efforts to mitigate the risk of an all-out war, the dangerous reality is that the growing crossfire. Hundreds of people died during this year's Hajj pilgrimage in Saudi Arabia as the faithful faced intense high temperatures at Islamic holy sites in the Desert Kingdom, officials said Wednesday, as people tried to claim their loved ones' bodies. Saudi Arabia has not commented on the death toll amid the heat during the pilgrimage, which is required of every able Muslim once in their life, nor offered any causes for those who died. Hundreds of people had lined up at the emergency complex in Al Muazzim neighborhood in Mecca, trying to get information about their missing family members. One list circulating online suggested at least 550 people died during the 5-day Hajj. A medic who spoke to the Associated Press on condition of anonymity to discuss information not released publicly by the government said that the names on the list appeared genuine. That medic and another official, who also spoke on condition of anonymity, said they believed at least 600 bodies were at the facility. Deaths aren't uncommon at the Hajj, which has drawn at times over 2 million people to Saudi Arabia. There have been stampedes and epidemics through the pilgrimage's history. Each year, the Hajj draws hundreds of thousands of pilgrims from low-income nations, many of whom have had little, if any, pre-Hajj health care. An article in the April edition of the Journal of Infection and Public Health said, "Communicable illnesses can spread among the gathered masses, many of whom saved their entire lives for their trips, and can be elderly with pre-existing health conditions," the paper added. However, the number of dead this year suggests something caused the number of deaths to swell. Already, several countries have said that some of their pilgrims died because of the heat that spread across the holy sites at Mecca, including Jordan and Tunisia. The UK general election. An independent candidate standing in Birmingham said 70% of hell will be women, and joked about domestic violence on a podcast earlier this year. Ahmed Yaqub, who came third in the West Midlands mayoral election in May, with just over 10% of the vote, is standing against Labour's Shabana Mahmood in Ladywood, one of the most deprived constituencies in the country. The latest prediction from Electoral Calculus put him on 31%, with Mahmood on 37%, and Labour is reportedly diverting resources to the seat to rally more voters. In March, Yaqub appeared on an episode of the Minted Minds podcast, hosted by the Birmingham-based entrepreneur Abdul Zaman. Other guests on this episode included Shakil Afsar, who is running as an independent candidate in Hall Green, and was one of the lead protesters in the row over LGBTQ+ equality teaching in Birmingham schools in 2019, Dr. Asif Munaf, a former apprentice contestant recently suspended by the General Medical Council pending an investigation of allegedly anti-Semitic social media posts, and the Coventry-based restaurant owners Mohammed Sunny Sarnwal and Waqas Vic Mohammed. Munaf said the majority of followers of Dajjal, a false messiah or liar in Islam, would be women who had been empowered, and Yaqub agreed, saying that 70% of hell is going to be women. One of the guests can be heard saying, "We don't want to get cancelled." Later, during a discussion about women making money by dancing on TikTok, Mohammed said, "Getting back to masculinity, I personally would give her a backhander. I'm not joking." Shakil responded, "We do not advocate any physical violence against anyone." Sarnwell said, "He's right, though, what he's saying." Jess Phillips, the former shadow domestic violence minister, said, "I have handled many cases of domestic abuse in Birmingham, and the women beaten and raped weren't laughing. These attitudes have no place in our democracy. He should explain to the 50% of constituents in Ladywood who are women, and all the decent men too, how they can possibly trust he will work for them when he is sharing these awful views." A class action lawsuit against the company that once ran the largest Christian university in the country, that's the Grand Canyon University, says the plaintiffs were victims of a deceitful racketeering scheme because the school lied to them about tuition costs. This comes several months after the US Department of Education fined Grand Canyon University $37.7 million over similar complaints. A federal student aid investigation found GCU lied to more than 7,500 former and current students about the cost of its doctoral programs over several years. GCU falsely advertised a lower cost than what 98% of students ended up paying to complete certain doctoral programs. GCU lied about the cost of its doctoral programs to attract students to enroll, said FSA Chief Operating Officer Richard Cordray. FSA takes its oversight responsibilities seriously. GCU's lies harmed students, broke their trust, and led to unexpectedly high levels of student debt. Today, we are holding GCU accountable for its actions, protecting students and taxpayers, and upholding the integrity of the federal student aid programs. Louisiana has become the first state to require that the Ten Commandments be displayed in every public school classroom. That's the latest move from a GOP-dominated legislature pushing a conservative agenda under a new governor. The legislation that Republican Governor Jeff Landry signed into law on Wednesday requires a poster-sized display of the Ten Commandments in large, easily readable font in all public classrooms from kindergarten to state-funded universities. If you want to respect the rule of law, you've got to start from the original lawgiver, which was Moses, who got the commandments from God, Landry said. Opponents questioned the law's constitutionality and voted to challenge it in court. Proponents said the measure is not solely religious, but it has historical significance. In the language of the law, the Ten Commandments are foundational documents of our state and national government. The posters, which will be paired with a 4-paragraph context statement describing how the Ten Commandments were a prominent part of American public education for almost 3 centuries, must be in place in classrooms by the start of 2025. Under the law, state funds will not be used to implement the mandate. The posters will be paid for through donations. A Missouri judge has rejected a clergy-led effort to halt the state's near-total abortion ban, rebuking the faith leader's claim that the law violates the state's constitution by imposing the religious values of one faith tradition on all residents of the state. The law permits abortions only for medical emergencies and makes no allowances for pregnancies that result from rape or incest. In an order filed on Friday, June the 14th, St. Louis Circuit Judge Jason Sennheiser addressed an overtly religious section of the law, one of several trigger bills in states that went into effect after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022. In recognition that Almighty God is the author of life, that all men and women are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among those are life, the law reads, repeating language in the Declaration of Independence. The law was challenged in January of last year by a coalition of 14 Christian, Jewish, and Unitarian leaders with legal assistance from Americans United for Separation of Church and State and the National Women's Law Center. State officials have weaponized their religious beliefs to control the bodies and deny the autonomy of women and all who can become pregnant, jeopardizing their health, lives, and futures, read the faith leader's initial complaint. The faith group insists that some religions require access to an abortion, and that the Missouri law imposes the belief of one religious tradition on the others. A flamboyant Brooklyn pastor known as the Bling Bishop has been sentenced to 9 years in prison for schemes that included preying on the bank account of one of his own followers. Lamore Whitehead, a New York preacher known for his flashy lifestyle, was found guilty in March of wire fraud, attempted extortion, and making false statements to federal investigators. Prosecutors argued that Whitehead used his position as a religious leader to fleece people out of money to fund his lavish lifestyle. Whitehead made headlines in 2022 after he was robbed at gunpoint during a live-streamed sermon. The thieves made off with $1 million, £840,000, in watches, diamonds, and emeralds. Damian Williams, the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, called Whitehead a con man and said the sentence marks the end of his various schemes. Officials say Whitehead, who led the Leaders of Tomorrow International Ministries in Canarsie, New York, deceived people with false promises and stole their money to purchase items including fancy clothing and cars. One of his victims, a member of his church, gave him $90,000, her life savings, believing that the money would go towards purchasing a home for her. It was instead spent on clothing and car payments. Meanwhile, in Canada, in Toronto, a mobile video van drove around making a point. See this video. Following this news, Tercia and I will be chatting with Paul Mizzle, a combative social media poster who seems to be a Christian, but I don't know how fervent he is. You can join in by text. This has been Global Atheist News. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for watching.